the race between Jim and Kenny, and I only know what I saw. I don't know what went on between them in the way of their discussions, but the great race between Nelly and the bicycle. I would like for somebody to create some stories on those experiences. That could have been a very terrible incident.
I don't think did I ever hear this? I don't think I heard the story.
Yeah, I think I told it.
You might have told Garrett, but I don't think I ever. Did you hear it, Brian?
I wrote about it.
The great race between Nelly and the bicycle.
I don't even remember.
Who's Nelly?
Yeah, I think you need to tell it again.
Well,
There's a horse probably.
I don't know how you would title it, but maybe a good title would be A Great Race, but No One Told Nelly.
I'm so confused. What is going on?
I don't know what you're
The rail farm.
Who's Nelly?
The rail farm is made up largely of a lot of hills, some very steep ones. And there was quite a contingency of farm workers around at the top of one of the hills. And somebody must have said, I'll race you down to the bottom. And Jim was on a bicycle and Kenny was on Nelly.
Is Nelly the horse?
Nelly's the horse.
Okay.
And,
So now we're going to start who Nelly is.
and let's just kind of show you a diagram. Here's a long,
Never heard this.
a long trail that always leads to the barn where we hauled hay and everything. A wagon load with sheaves of oats and wheat and all kinds of hay. And here's a roadway that comes in on an angle down a huge hill. And out about there where your plate is a plateau. And the race started clear up on the high hill here, and the ending, they had agreed, was down there about where your elbows are. And somebody said the word go, and then they both took off in a huge way. And Nelly was a good workhorse, had been around for a few years, but still was very spry. Well, who do you think won?
How about the bike?
The bike. Well, the
How
bike
old
went
were the
straight
boys?
down, and you're right. Why didn't Kenny win? Because that horse is pretty fast.
Did Nelly's legs give out under her on the way down the hill?
Did Nelly not go straight?
No, I've given you some clues.
Nelly didn't know it was a race.
Nelly didn't give a care whether it was a race or not. She knew what she wanted.
You went to the barn probably.
But wasn't the barn where the destination was?
Okay, that's the lane to the barn.
Oh, so she ran off to get some hay.
That's the lane to end the race.
So she just veered off this way.
Did she hit the bicycle?
She took a severe right turn, and Kenny really hit the ground. I mean, tell you, you just don't expect that type of thing. Well, I saw that. Kenny was not himself for quite a while.
How old was he?
He was probably about 16, 17 in that range, maybe less. But it was a terrible crash for him because he was not himself.
Did he have to go to the doctor or the hospital? Or?
Never did, but you didn't do. If you could get up and walk around in those days, who cares?
And your mother was a nurse, so she...
But I'm sure he had at that point, looking back, and and observing him thereafter, he probably had a pretty severe concussion. But I never was informed as to how that race started. All I know is that it started, and it could have ended very, very tragically. In fact, it's just a wonder that you have 5 crazy boys with that kind of attitude of always wanting to top the other. It's a wonder we survived growing up on a farm where there wasn't any supervision much. Granddad Wirtz was a very strong leader, very demanding, but he was crippled up with arthritis and couldn't get out. But as far as he ever got was to the buckeye tree, where he sat most of the day. But he could tell us what he wanted done, and wasn't able to follow us out to see how it was done, or to make sure that the kids didn't do screwy things, which we often did. Then there was another incident with we all were sure that Granddad couldn't hear well, and that was one of the few operating farms in the neighborhood that was fast changing to a kind of a bedroom community, and so kids from all over would come just to say they went to the Rayl farm. And well, the men's had, how many men's had? They had 5 or 6 kids. And the whole family would come, and Granddad tried to chase the kids away so that we could get some work done. His saying was, one boy's a boy, 2 boys is a half a boy, 3 boys is no boy at all. And he was pretty much right about that. At any rate, the kids it was haying season, and kids from all over would come. They liked to ride on the hay wagon, especially when you got it loaded with a loose load of hay, not bales. We were not baling at that time. We were using horses and equipment, horse-drawn equipment, to load a very efficient hay loader, which when it was operating, well, even you could crank it so at its highest, it probably was about 20 feet high, to get the hay clear up on the top of a high load of hay. And we always loaded it as much as we thought we could safely hold on. And then after it was loaded, the kids all wanted to ride back to the barn. Well, actually going down that same hill that I told you about, a real strange thing happened in that, and I've never talked to Jim about his experience. He was he was kind of the favorite boy on the farm, in that he was extremely good with a team of horses, and knew what the horses were going to do under most circumstances. And Granddad Wirtz said, well, there's a boy that'll never have to worry about a job. Never have to worry about a job, because he's so good with a team of horses. Well, obviously after the war was over, first tractor came in and the horses pretty much became obsolete. But in this instance, we were following the same trail, and there was another hill on that trail, going through a wooded area, and there's a neck yoke between the horses that is used to keep the horses the same distance apart always, and to hold the wagon back. The tongue is built in a unique way that the horses will hold a heavy load back with the design of the tongue and the neck yoke. And I don't know why this particular neck yoke that Dad bought was made out of pipe. And it had a slot in the center with a ring coming through. And that ring was just pressed together so that what we didn't know is that if that ring worked around, it could slide out and the tongue would drop down, and that's exactly what happened. Even though
Like fall off or just drop down?
the tongue dropped down and the load was going downhill. Now that's the tool that the horses can hold the load back with the design of that tongue and the neck yoke. So when that ring slid out through the gap in the ring, allowing the tongue to drop down, now there is absolutely no control of the wagon, the load going down a steep hill. And while whose law is it that says that something continues in a straight line until acted upon Newton?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that tongue is going to bobble back and forth, depending on whichever wheel on the front hits a stone or rut or something. And so that tongue was bouncing back and forth, hitting the horses on their hooves. And obviously, I would have thought doing some pretty hard slapping, and the horses could sense once they're in a situation where they have absolutely no control. Now the wagon is hitting them in the rear end, and Jim is trying to hold them back. There's no way that there's any control whatsoever. You have a huge load of hay out of control with no way to steer or control its speed, and the horses just at one time must have given a lunge and pulled the entire fifth wheel mechanism that is attached to the front wheels. It's like the fifth wheel on a truck. I don't know if you're familiar with it. So that immediately dropped the load down without any wheels on the front. Now the horses were headed straight toward the barn, which is what horses will do, and way out of control. The tongue had hit something, and the front wheels, remember that they were completely detached from the wagon, jumped up over the tongue, and the tongue was actually pointing back. Now you have a steel neck yoke that holds the two horses in the same position. One horse tried to go on the right side, on the east side of a tree, and one tried to go on the west side. So you can imagine what happened. They hit that tree like hitting a stone wall,
Jeez.
The mare dropped and was laying down when we finally caught up to them, and her colt, which was a full-grown horse by that time, probably about 3 or 4 years old, was still standing, but you could see they both had received pretty major injury. Whatever, we don't know what happened with the collar on and that metal pipe between them. They hit that tree. It was a huge tree, and going full speed, that had to cause some damage. And the mare was never right. Later, she just went out of her head and had to be shot several days later. The problem didn't show up right away, but I'm sure it was connected. Whatever her problem was, fabulous animal. Still had a lot of good years left in it. But I've never talked to Jim. All the neighbor kids that started out with us were still on that wagon. Kenny sensed something, and in those years, he was pretty much a role model for him. So he jumped off the back when we saw that the whole load was out of control. And I figured, hey, if he's bailing out, I'm getting out of here too. So I jumped off, and we were running along, and we saw the fifth wheel pull out from underneath the wagon, allowing it to drop down, dig into the dirt, and that was a very quick stop. All the kids went rolling off that wagon, and there were probably about 5 or 6, well, all the neighbor kids, 5 or 6 kids, and they all, as soon as it hit the ground, pointing down, the kids, and the haze pretty well stayed intact, but the kids went rolling off. There was nothing left to stop them, and they had hit the ground pretty hard. Nobody got hurt. I don't understand that. How in the world a tragedy like that can occur, and a whole load of kids on top of it. Nobody got hurt.
How old were you?
I was probably about 10, but most of the kids were younger than I was.
So that makes Jim, what, about 12?
Kenny would have been 14 then.
Probably 13, 14.
I'm gonna stop it for just a minute.